Hey guys, and today we're going to talk about Moses. And in this series, we've been talking about people in the Bible who, just like we do, sometimes they get distracted away from Jesus and they got distracted by some type of sin. So far, we've talked about Paul and David, and Paul was distracted by murder. Actually, he murdered Christians, and David was distracted by lust after Bathsheba, and they were both distracted off of Jesus. But God still used both of them even after that. And so today we're going to talk about Moses. And Moses was a unique story. He was floated down a stream in a basket by his mother to protect Moses from the Egyptians, and he was actually found by an Egyptian woman, and she actually raised him. Um, and he had it very well off in life. He didn't want for anything. And then later in life, he actually became so angry that he killed an Egyptian. Okay, so he was distracted by anger and eventually led to murder. Um, and not saying that like all anger obviously results in murder, but it did in Moses' case. And in Exodus 3, we see that that didn't matter. That sin issue that happened in his past, it didn't stop God from using him. It didn't matter that that had happened because God still wanted to use him. Now, does sin have consequences? Absolutely, and we'll get to that in a second, what the consequence of his sin was. But let's stay on Exodus 3 right now, and that is telling of how God still used Moses even after that. Now, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. For I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Okay, so God basically appeared to Moses in a burning bush, and he told them, I need you to go and help my chosen people, which were the Israelites in the Old Testament, his nation, and I need you to deliver them from Egypt and out of captivity because the Egyptians were oppressing them. They were making them do very hard labor, and it was morning to night, and basically just taking advantage of them. They were slaves, okay? And God's like, hey, Moses, I need you to go deliver them out of that land. I need you to go get them and take them out of Egypt. Okay? So a guy that had murdered in the past, okay? So in our case and scenario today, that means he'd be going to jail. Okay, so picture someone who went to jail for murder and then they got out, okay? Moses didn't go to jail, but I'm just trying to keep it in our terms, okay? And then he got out and God said, here are some people that are in captivity and they are mine. They are children of me. They are children of mine, and I need you to go free them. Okay? So God was using Moses to go get his people out of Egypt. So this also correlates to, and it's kind of a precursor to Jesus, because Moses delivers the people out of Egypt just like Jesus delivers us from sin when he sacrificed himself on the cross. And so this is a big deal that Moses is involved in. He is working hand in hand, with God to free his people. So it was a really big deal that the things that God was doing with Moses, and yet he had murdered somebody in the past. And there were obviously consequences, because there's consequences to every action. When we fall down different paths that aren't Jesus, there are consequences. Um, just like when we see that we reap the spiritual reward of staying focused on Jesus. When we go off on those sin paths that lead us away from Him, there's various consequences, and whether that be spiritual consequences, emotional consequences, or even physical consequences, because all of that sin, all those paths, they only lead to bad things, and they only lead to you feeling horrible about yourself, and they offer fulfillment, and they never will fulfill, because Jesus is the only one that fulfills. And so Moses, his consequence was he led the people to the promised land, but he wasn't denied access. God did not allow him to go into the promised land. And that was because of his act of murdering an Egyptian. So, like I said, different consequences for everything. It might not ever be physical, but it could even just be spiritual or emotional. But there are consequences for sin. So I'm not trying to say that, oh, just do whatever you want because God's going to use you anyways. No, I'm saying that God is so good because even though we do sin and even though we do fall, God does still use us. And sin is obviously something we want to try not to get distracted with because there's consequences for it. But no matter what, Jesus is always willing to forgive us, and He is always willing to restore that relationship back with God. And ultimately, if He is your Savior, He's forgiven every sin anyways. So yes, we do want to avoid those consequences of sin, so we want to avoid the sin paths altogether. But ultimately, staying focused on Jesus is the ultimate priority, and not being so hard-lined on yourself that you should be so pressed and so like worried and crazy and literally going out of your mind because you're like, oh my gosh, sin, 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 I gotta stay away, stay away, stay away, stay away, stay away. No, keep your eyes on Jesus, and you will find that He is so much better than all the rest of that stuff. And so be someone who wants to be in a relationship with Jesus, not someone who wants to be good at not sinning. Okay? So I just wanted to clarify with that. And in Moses' life, he committed the act of murder, but man, God still used him in such a big way. And that is all praise to God, and that's praise to God that He allows us to be used through all of our sin. So thank you guys for listening, and tomorrow we'll go over Noah's story, it's a really good story as well. He got distracted by other various things, different things than what we've read so far. So I hope you guys are having a great break. I hope you had a great Christmas and a Happy New Year.